Hi. We're conducting an interview today with Doug Creighton. We are Pat McPherson and Susan Creighton, partners in our business Narratus, which creates archival collections for individuals, families, and organizations. Today's date is January 30th, 2023, and we are interviewing, as I said, Doug Creighton. So just to identify our voices, this is Pat McPherson speaking, and
I'm Susan Creighton, also here on the interview as part of Narratus.
And I'm Doug Creighton, the interviewee.
Doug, if you could just say one sentence describing yourself and your connection to the Marlboro Morris Ale.
I am a former Morris dancer and currently a Morris musician. I've attended the Marlboro Ale since 1981 frequently. I was a member of the organization as well as an attendee over the years.
Awesome. You said you didn't remember dates, but you remember the first year.
I remembered that date.
And what team were you a part of then? And under what circumstances did you come to the Ale?
I was a member at that time of Green Fiddle Morris from Toronto, Ontario. I came to the Ale as a dancer. Green Fiddle was a joint side, so there was a side of male dancers and a side of female dancers, and we were both invited. We were invited as a joint team to the Ale in 1981.
You said it was from Hogtown. What was that reference?
Hogtown Morris was another
Oh,
group in Toronto, and they were invited to attend, I think, in 1983. And that was the second time I came to the Ale. And I came both as a dancer and as a musician, maybe more musician that year. At that point, I played flute for Morris dancing, which was not great.
were you the only musician for that team?
No, I wasn't, but the other musician couldn't come.
Could what? Oh,
Could
couldn't
not
come.
attend the Ale that year, so they were desperate for music.
So you came with your flute.
I did.
Awesome. Was there a lot of overlap between those two teams?
There was some, not a lot. The founders of Hogtown Morris were a sort of a splinter group from Green Fiddle, and they left Green Fiddle because of politics. And when I first moved to Toronto and discovered Morris dancing, I just couldn't get enough of it. So there were two groups, so I joined them both.
Both Green Fiddle and
Hogtown, yes. They practiced on separate nights.
were they related to Fiddler's Green in any way? Fiddler's Green, the folk club in Toronto at that time?
Yeah, Green Fiddle Morris started as an offshoot of the folk club.
No kidding. Can you just give a little bit of history of that?
Well, I wasn't around for that part.
Yeah.
Fiddler's Green, a folk club, formed in Toronto in the late 1970s, mostly Scottish and English expats. So it had more of a kind of a UK focus, although they had performers from North America play there as well. And the Morris team sort of grew out of that organization. I think they may have practiced at the same place where the club was initially, but that was before my time. That was late 70s. I joined Green Fiddle Morris in the fall of 1980 when I was 19.
19. And so in 1981, all of a sudden you're thrown or you're eager. I don't know. What were your emotions in coming to the Marlboro Ale?
I was just so excited. It's a long drive from Toronto to Marlboro, Vermont. And the van that I was riding in, when we pulled into the college, it was late at night, like wee hours of the morning. And we were all so excited to be there. We jumped out of the van and started doing a dance, like right there. There wasn't anyone around. We just were so excited to be there. Yeah, I know. It was sort of, those were the days.
Oh, were you the youngest on the team? Or
I was. I was the youngest on the team for a long time.
Yeah.
I was sort of at the tail end of that big folk boom in the
70s,
60s and 70s.
Yeah, with all the expats. Cool, so cool. And so you're there with Green Fiddle in 81, with Hogtown in 83.
I think it was 83, yeah.
Yeah. And can you remember the trajectory of your involvement with the Marlboro Ale itself? Rather, sort of this switch from being a member of a team coming from actually far away to being part of the organization. How did that happen?
Well, mainly because I moved to the area. I was living in Toronto. I moved to Amherst, Massachusetts, which is not far from where the ale is held.
And when was that?
1990.
Okay.
I'm doing pretty well with the dates.
Yeah,
so
you
far.
are. Excellent.
So, yeah, summer of 1990, I moved to Amherst to get married. And I didn't join up with any local groups right away. It took about a year or a year and a half, and I joined the Marlboro Morris Men, as they were at that time. And they were not the organizers of the ale. That was really Marlboro Morris and Sword, the women's group that organized it. But the men provided input and labor, tote and carry, set up the maypole, put the porta-johns over here,
Yeah.
move these beds to that room, kind of labor.
Right. So there's a period in between 1983 and 1990 when you were dancing with another team, perhaps.
Yeah, I attended Marlboro in those years with Green Fiddle Morris, Hogtown Morris Men. I was the musician for Goat's Head at Northwest Morris, at least once. Let's see. Once the Toronto Morris Men formed in 86 or so, I did join that team. I wasn't a founder member, but I did join that team soon after they started up. And I attended with them as well as a dancer and a musician. I think I was
And
both.
what were you playing then?
Oh,
as a
by then
musician?
I had learned to play the melodeon, the button diatonic accordion. And that's what I've played for Morris pretty much ever since.
The poor flute.
Well, flute has other talents, other strengths. It's good for other things. Not so good for Morris.
Yeah.
Nope. Not in my opinion.
Yeah. Were you like an organizer on the Toronto Morris Men team or just came along?
I was just rank and file.
Awesome. Interesting. Haven't got there yet.
So between like 1983 and when I moved to the area, those were the groups that I took part in. I don't think there were any others, but I was I was pretty active in the Morris scene in Canada, both in Ontario when I was there, and for the time that I was in Winnipeg. I was a dancer and a musician for the Village Green Morris Men when I was living in Winnipeg.
So you danced with John Trevenan?
Yeah, I did.
So let's just
Trevenan.
say Trevenan. So it's Trevenan, Trevenan, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. And when were you there?
80.
In the 80s.
Yeah, 85, 86.
Okay.
I was in Winnipeg.
Cool. So Morris has been like your main hobby? Way
Yeah,
of life?
it's certainly been, I guess, over the years looking back, it's been a focal point for my community. I have many friends, and I've spent a lot of time at it.
Good. So we've taken you up to being a member of the Toronto Morris Men, moving to Amherst, taking a little bit of time to acclimate yourself to a
Get married, get divorced.
whole new country and marital status,
Yeah, right.
and trying to, again, find this community, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so who did you end up connecting with then?
Well, one of the good things about moving to Amherst was through my attendance at the Ale, I had a number of people in Western Mass that I knew.
Oh, right.
At least I was acquainted with. So that was very helpful. I joined two groups, the Marlboro Morris Men, and also a longsword team called That Long Tall Sword. When I moved to Amherst, I stayed on That Long Tall Sword for a year or two. I wasn't involved in that team quite so long because a third team started up called Guiding Star, and I was one of the movers and shakers for the beginning of that team. So I thought 3 groups was a little too much, so I cut back to 2, and I was active as a dancer for about 22 years, something like that, on those 2 teams, the Marlboro Morris Men and Guiding Star Clog Morris.
Were you also playing as a musician?
Yep.
Periodically?
Periodically, more for the Cotswold Morris group, not so much for Guiding Star.
Uh-huh.
Until I had a knee injury doing Northwest. And I had surgery on my knee, and that ended my ritual Morris dance career, and I just played after that point. I played for both of those groups still.
When did
Marlboro
that
Morris
happen?
Men, and that happened in 2002.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Guck.
Well, I had a good 20
You had a good run. 'Cause you
fat 20 years of
started
dancing.
young.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's sort of a good chronology of your Morris life and experience. So starting to focus on the Morris Ale, Marlboro Ale. So you're now local. You're on the Marlboro Morris Men, and on another team which could or could not be invited to the Ale. So I know you ended up playing some administrative roles in the Ale,
Right.
and also as important people during the Ale. So let's start talking about that, how that happened.
When I was local and playing lots, I got asked, I'm not sure exactly how it all happened, but I became and I'm not even sure if there's a title for this, but I was in charge of music for the mass dances and processionals. Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of each ale weekend, Saturday morning anyway, I should say, there would be a meeting of the musicians of all the teams, and we would just go over what the processional tune was, which didn't change from year to year. It was always the same thing. So it was just basically a warm-up. Mm-hmm. And we'd also play over the tunes that would be used for the massed dances. The three big performances over the course of the ale would have each team showcased, and 3 or 4 mass dances would be sort of interspersed in the program. And the mass dances were for anyone who wanted to get up and dance. So I had this herd of musicians, and I would basically make sure we played at the right speed, and we started at the same time, and we ended at the same time, ish. So I did that for many years.
Was there a name for that job?
I'm not sure. Music Meister, Music Honcho.
Yeah. But people knew it was you and paid attention.
Right. Yeah. As a sideline to that, they also put me in charge of music for the social dancing that would happen on Saturday night. That was something that I was less good at, maybe. I was playing for contra dances and English country dances, so I had, a repertoire, not a very big repertoire of contra dance tunes that I could play. But I would sit in with the band and make sure there was some sort of continuity, because it was just a volunteer band. People could get up and walk away, and that would be fine. But we wanted to make sure that there was music for the dancers.
and yeah.
So just to clarify, the social dancing that you're talking about was that not the first evening, Saturday nights, there would be a contra dance that was put together with different people getting up to volunteer and call, and different people who were there at the ale just sitting in to be the music for it.
Correct. Social dancing, not Morris dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so it was a pickup band. Did you go around and try to find people to sit up there?
I did a bit.
Yeah.
But the ale was a pretty established event by this point, and with lots of return attendees, so people knew what was going on. I didn't have to do a whole lot of drafting, but some particularly strong musicians I would sometimes try to make sure or cajole into coming to the dance, at least for part of the evening.
And so we're in the early 1990s by this time?
Yeah, 90s into the 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're in the ale's second decade already.
Third
decade. Yeah.
Third and fourth.
Right.
The other part of the music honcho. I talked about processionals and mass dances. Yes, right. So I had that job for quite a while. I was also the person during the mass dance performances that made sure groups knew when they were going to be performing. So I would receive the lineup from the person in charge of the mass dancing, and I would go to the various teams sort of milling around the perimeter of the show dance area and make sure they knew when they were up next, or next but one, or whatever. And I gave myself the name of Whip like parliamentary whip. I don't know if you know what a parliamentary whip does, but he makes sure that all the members are there for votes. So I made sure that all the teams realized they were going on.
And when you say parliamentary, you mean Canadian parliamentary?
Well, of course.
Yes.
Well, that's what they call them in England too, I think.
Yeah,
But,
the whip.
the whip.
You didn't carry
Besides, it was a cool name.
Yeah, but you didn't carry a whip.
Oh yeah, I did. A bullwhip. No. I
No.
didn't really.
Did you have a special costume as the whip?
No, I didn't.
No top hat?
Nope.
Too bad.
But that it actually came up for the program. They were making one year. They were making a sort of a fundraising program. They sold advertising to local businesses, and they wanted to list me as part of the ale organizers and workers, and so John Todd, who was spearheading this program, came to me and said, "What do you want your job to be?" I was ready. I want to be the whip. Yeah.
And so when you're saying they were raising money and they were putting together a program, who was they at
They
that
were
point?
the Marlboro Ale Organizing Committee.
So did you ever join the organizing committee?
I did for a few years. Yeah.
When was that? Ish.
I'm really not too sure about this. I think it was early 2000s.
Mm-hmm. And who do you recall who was on the committee then?
I know that my responsibility on the committee, other than just sort of general input, was organizing the tours. The tours that take place in Brattleboro on Saturday, and the Windham County tours that happen on the Sunday of the ale. So I did that together with Mary Sargent. We were both new on the committee at the time. I'm not entirely sure who the squire was of the ale committee. So I think it was in the early 2000s that I was on the committee. I lasted for maybe 3 or 4 years. That was all.
And why do you say lasted? That sounds like I was eager to get off.
You are exactly right, Pat. I was eager to get off. There was an incident. I'd rather not get into the details, but I left because I'm not sure how to say this diplomatically. I left.
Okay.
Yeah. I won't give a reason.
Committees are hard.
Right. And I think I left maybe in 2002 or 3, maybe. Something like that.
Okay. Did you keep working as part of the team? Were you still doing those jobs?
I was definitely still on Guiding Star and the Marlboro Men, and continued playing for them and attending the ale. And as far as I know, I was still doing those jobs that I described. I also, at some point in there, I was the barker.
And what's that job?
That is sort of the MC of the mass dance performances. The one Saturday morning at the college, Sunday afternoon on Elliott Street in Brattleboro, and Sunday afternoon in Newfane.
Can I also just throw in a clarification for the purpose of this interview? You've used the term mass dances to refer to the dance where everybody gets up and dance, and you've used it to refer to the show dances. So
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Just
okay.
clarify which you're talking about.
Well,
here.
those 3 performances that I've described on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, and Sunday afternoon are parts of the ale where all of the teams gather together in one place and do a performance for the public. And so each of the groups that's invited to the ale performs a dance, and interspersed, and because there are 15 to 20 groups, interspersed in those performances are masked dances, which are specifically everybody can join in, mixed up, not with your own group usually, just jumping up and finding 5 other people to form a set and do the masked dance.
There are many photographs that we've seen of people obviously in different kits from different
Or sometimes
teams.
no kid at all.
Or sometimes no kit at all. Someone jumped in from the audience
Right.
then doing those dances. And
those mass dances, the musicians for the mass dances were an amalgamation of all the musicians for all the groups. So it was a big band.
And so who kept that in line and kept the tempo going? Was that you?
That was me.
Oh.
I had a whistle.
Oh, no.
And if actually some years I had the whistle, and other years another trusted musician, the bass drum player, had a whistle, and I would just say, okay, blow the whistle, which means we're starting or we're stopping.
And so this was part of your herding the musician job.
Right. Music Meister.
Music Meister
Honcho
that
thing.
started, early on Saturday morning before that trip down the hill with all the teams.
Right.
And so did you use the whistle then?
Actually, I say I had a whistle. I mostly had a designated whistleblower. I didn't have to blow the whistle myself. It's kind of a personal thing. I didn't own the whistle, and you don't want to blow on a whistle that isn't your whistle.
Who was the whistleblower?
I think it was Paul Eric Smith, pretty consistently.
Was Paul Eric also banging on the drum?
You bet. Well, mostly there was at least a year or two when my wife Susan was playing bass drum.
Oh, you lucky girl. Okay.
I was never as good as Paul Eric.
You can't be shy when you play the bass drum. And I don't think you were shy. That was never a problem. But it's not an easy thing to do. It looks like it would be easy, but there are only a couple of people in this world that I would play with who I would allow to be my bass drummer.
Awesome.
In fact, one of my sort of favorite ale memories was always gathering up at the top of the hill on Saturday morning, getting ready to process down the hill, and what you would listen for were these 4 really loud quarter notes on the bass drum from Paul Eric. He would just go wham, 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 and the music would begin. And that sort of launched the morning. So
Yeah.
he was pretty critical also to helping you set the tempo.
Oh, absolutely.
Maintaining it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys were a pair.
Awesome. I'm just looking at my questions, and we've been talking about a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, so I said a little bit about being the barker.
Yeah,
so,
I wonder.
I was, Aaron Hayden did it, well, Paul Eric Smith was a barker for a very long time. I think he started doing it after Tony stopped, perhaps.
Tony Barron.
After Tony Barron stopped. I'm not sure there was anyone in between there. And Eric stepped back, and Aaron Hayden stepped up. He did it for a number of years. I did it then for a few years. And it was okay, but I realized I just wasn't as good as my favorite, who was Eric. So I convinced him to come back. And then, just to say, I call him Eric. I think he's generally known as Paul Eric Smith. His real name, of course, is just Paul Smith. The Eric is a very long story. But, so he came back. He was Barker for a number of years. And then I think the current Barker is Sarah Pilzer.
The first female Barker. Is that significant in any way? Just
It's good. Significant in that it's good.
why? Oh.
I did have something of a kit and a persona when I was Barker. I wore tennis shorts. And you wouldn't believe how unsettling it was. Instead of me wearing white pants to wear white shorts, people thought that was just radical. So that was kind of fun.
So you weren't a dancer by this time. You were.
I think I had stopped dancing by then.
What did you wear along with the white tennis shorts?
Okay, I had
Nothing,
high tops.
Susan.
I had high tops, shoes, white shorts. I had a bright red dress shirt, wingtip dress shirt, a tailcoat, black tie.
Bow tie?
Bow tie. It was a wingtip, a bow tie. And I had a red cap.
Was it like the Toronto beanie or a red baseball hat?
It's a brand, I think, called Kangol. Kangol.
Yeah.
Sort of a mesh fabric.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You
But it was
came
not a cricket cap.
No, it was not.
Toronto.
you came up with that
I did.
all by yourself.
All by myself.
What kind of comments did you get?
Well, not so much comments as people pointing and laughing. I didn't care. I also made a megaphone. Turns out the megaphone, not a great idea.
How come?
Too directional.
I said, how come?
The megaphone was too directional. It broadcasted my voice very nicely to a very specific place, and I needed to talk to crowds that were 360 degrees around me. So it was a bad idea. So I just carried it. It was a prop that I never used, which was kind of fun too, to have a prop that you never use.
In my holster. So, Doug, you've kind of grown up in the Morris world. You've grown up around the Morris Ale. Mm-hmm. You've played just about every role that a person could play.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, what
I was never in charge of it.
Okay. You were on the committee.
I was on the committee, but I wasn't. I was never the squire of the ale, and I didn't really have any interest in doing that.
Okay. And you were never the squire of any of your teams?
Oh, no. I don't think I've ever been squire. I've been foreman, the person who teaches the dancing, but I've never been squire.
Okay.
I've been bag as well. That's the money person.
Okay. How have you seen the ale evolve over the years? Like, sort of thinking of what are the highlights of your experience? What changes did you see? Maybe reflecting on, men's and women's teams and how that whole part of the Morris world has evolved or changed. You want to just maybe
sure.
sort of chat.
Okay. The event itself, when I first attended, we did everything on grass. Dance areas were grassy areas. It was thought that Morris dancing would should be done on grass. And pretty soon after that point, after I started, the decision was made that grass was really not a good surface to Morris dance on. It absorbs a lot of the energy. You try to jump up and down on grass, it's a whole lot harder than jumping up and down on something hard like asphalt or stone.
Can I
Yeah.
intersect a question here? When early English country dancers started dancing, they were dancing in sticky shoes, like little running shoes, very lightweight kind of running shoes, and it made it possible for them to do this really, really radical kind of forward leaning style of dancing. And I'm wondering if the change from grass to not grass changed your shoes and also changed the style of the dancing.
Yeah, it did. Well, there have been a lot of changes over time, and most of these things aren't specific to the ale. I don't know how much you want me to talk about how Morris dancing has changed and how the ale has changed.
Let's go with how the ale has changed.
How the ale has changed.
Okay.
So where we danced during the course of the event shifted. The English teams arriving, I think that happened. That started to happen about when I started to attend in the early 1980s. That was very influential, I think, seeing English teams that were more sort of cutting edge. Here in the States, groups were still doing dances that had been published, that had been collected and published, historical dances, if you will. Whereas the English groups that were coming over were composing their own dances, were taking a tradition and changing it. By tradition, I mean the dance moves. They were slowing them down. They were changing them. They were being more creative, sort of using the collected dances as a framework. And being at the ale and seeing that, I think, influenced a lot of groups. The ale had a big change when the committee was formed to organize it. The schedule changed. Using buses to get dancers to different places in Windham County on Sunday was a big change. It was a big expense, too. It meant that the ale got to be a lot more expensive to attend. More than single-sexed or mixed teams, that never really made much difference to me. The thing that really made a difference to me were kids teams. Inviting kids groups. And I could really see two sides to that. I thought it was great that there were kids that were learning about Morris dancing and had a place to perform. Oftentimes the kids would come for just one day in the event. They wouldn't stay and be part of the whole event. So they were they weren't part of the fabric of the event in the same way, because they sort of arrived Saturday morning, danced during the day, and went home after dinner. And then there were kids groups that actually did come and stayed for the weekend. And that also changed things, because then being an adult, and you could argue when I was 19 I wasn't really an adult, but being an adult and hanging out with other adults and drinking and carrying on had to really be checked, because there were kids around. And some of those kids got into drinking, And that posed problems. I think the kids were probably carrying on too. I don't know about that. But I think having younger groups attend the ale changed it, definitely. I'm not saying it was a bad thing or a good thing, but it did definitely change the event.
And what was the chronology of this? When kids teams were first invited to join for a part of the day, did someone make a decision, let's let them stay over, or did the kids teams and their chaperones presumably decide, hey, we're going to stay the whole time? Was it a committee decision?
I don't know.
You have any idea?
I don't know. A lot of these kids, when they first performed at the Marlboro Ale, were quite young.
Yeah.
Maybe, 10, 12, 13. But then they got to be 16 and 17 and 18, and they were still dancing, a lot of them still sort of associated with their groups, but they're still not adults. Mm-hmm. And I think at that point they started spending overnights at the ale as well.
Do you know when?
And oftentimes these were children of dancers that were there anyway, sometimes anyway. So
part of a family group.
Yeah.
Mom and dad are here and I'm with them.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what decisions were made or when to invite kids, but that has been pretty consistent.
Since about when, do you know?
I don't know.
Okay. So you've mentioned having the English teams come and being creative in their traditions. And you've mentioned the schedule changing. You've mentioned with kids teams. You've mentioned the change from grass to pavement. I'm assuming pavement was the only alternative.
Yeah.
What changes did you experience personally?
It was a big change to be a local person, basically local. When I was living in Amherst and in Western Mass, I was half an hour, 45 minutes from the event. That was the biggest change for me, going from driving for 8 or 10 hours to being able to go home at night if I wanted to. So that wasn't the event changing so much as my relationship to the event.
Yeah.
What else?
What about friendships?
I guess, friendships, but also once I became a member of the Marlboro Morris Men, I mentioned earlier that they were sort of labor. They were a big labor source for organizing the event. So I became it became more of a work weekend for me too. I didn't just come and pay my money and be an attendee and sort of have fun all weekend. I was paying the scholarship rate, which was cheaper, but mopping floors and moving beds and being responsible for various jobs around the site. So it was, for me, it was being part of the backstage as well as being on stage.
That's a huge change.
Yeah.
I know that you have also volunteered to organize events at Pinewoods Camp. Have been a camper there for years, and then when you switch to being part of the fabric of the organization, it's feels so different.
Right.
What has motivated you over the years to take on these jobs? Want to pause it? So this may overlap my last question, but just to remind us where we were. Was asking about all the time which you have devoted to the ale, and maybe just reflect on that.
It's a great event. I've always really enjoyed myself, and I think I kind of have had this arc of going as an attendee, attending it as a big party, a place to perform and socialize, and just be an attendee, and when it's done, roll up your sleeping bag and go home. And then, especially when I was part of the local scene, wanting to give back to that, wanting to contribute to what I thought was a really great event. And now, after contributing lots, I'm ready to go back to being a participant and helping out, but sort of stepping back from the heavy work and paying more money and doing less work. So the last few times that I've attended the ale, and right as of now, I haven't been an ale attendee maybe once in the last 10 years. I don't know if it's been that long, 8 years. I stopped playing for the two Morris teams that I had been involved with for many years, the Marlboro Morris Men and Guiding Star. I stepped back from playing for the Marlboro Morris Men, and Guiding Star Clog Morris folded. It stopped. And so I was out without a team to play for a number of years now. And I've just joined Marlboro Morris and Sword, and I'm one of their musicians now, so I'll be a regular attendee at the ale, which is great.
And the context for that is?
The context for that was actually a conversation that happened maybe a year ago with one of the members of the group, asking me if I would ever be interested in playing for Marlboro Morris and Sword. And I said, oh yeah, sure. I would do that. It's a great group and great music too. And then lo and behold, I moved to Brattleboro. So it's also the group that I can walk to practice, which is fabulous.
You go from driving for 10 hours in a van to 45 minutes away. Oh, yay, I'm so close. To, golly, now I can walk. Your life has been organized around this. Come on. Okay. Confess.
It does kind of come across that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, you did say before, I mean, it's a huge part of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing what we choose in retrospectively. Gosh, I had a job, but all the rest of the time, not 100%, I really gave a lot of my life to this thing. We do. So then I wanted to ask you about, special events that really were meaningful to you over the years, or particular memories of something funny or meaningful that happened to you, or that you made happen.
Lots of little stories.
Go for it.
Well, that first ale that we went to, busting out of the van and doing it, because back then the Friday evening sort of gathering happened in the music shed, and we got there and the music shed was locked. So we danced in the foyer to the music shed. Just how excited we were to be there, and really not knowing what to expect. I'd never seen any other Morris dance groups. This was May of 81. Maybe just a couple of weeks before that I had, but I was just so new to it. And so that was very exciting. That same weekend, I think, back then there were no buses to take you to the various places on tour. And I found myself catching a ride on Sunday with Tom Kruskal and his baby daughter Lily, and a couple of the members of Windsor Morris from England in the back seat. And Lily was in a car seat, sort of between the driver and the passenger in the front, facing us. And Lily was fascinated with me. And I saw on her little knee that she had skinned it. And I pointed it. I said, "Oh, is that a boo-boo?" And she looked at me wide-eyed and said, "Boo-boo." And Tom was like, "What? What did she just say?" So anyway, Lily and I had a connection back then in May of 1981. Gosh. Probably the first time that we had whiskey and cigars. Whiskey and cigars kind of turned into a thing. And I'll just preface this with, I am not a cigar smoker. I would smoke a cigar annually at the Marlboro Morris Ale. So this was not really breaching the agreement with my life insurance policy or anything like that. And the first year that there was a committee, the squire of the committee chair, was my very good friend Dan Popowich. And he came to me. He was really anxious, I think, how the event was going to go over, whether everything was going to go smoothly, because it was changing the way things were going to happen.
Was this the first year of the committee?
Yes.
Whoa.
First year.
Okay.
And Dan said, once all the dancing is over, the feast is over, when I can take a breath, why don't you and I get together and we'll drink some scotch and we'll have a cigar. I don't, maybe the cigar was my idea, maybe it was his idea, and I said, sure, yep, you bring the whiskey, I'll bring the cigars. And so after the speeches and the feast and the skits and all of that had happened on Sunday night, Dan looked me up and we found a little place outside where we could sit, and I congratulated him on a job well done, and we had some whiskey and we smoked a cigar. Now the thing is that when you're doing something like that and there's 200 Morris dancers around, you get discovered. And so people sort of saw us and said, "What are you doing? What's that?" "It's a cigar." "Do you have any more cigars?" And so we would, people would kind of want to hang out with us while we were having our whiskey and cigars. And it sort of over the years became this thing. At the end of the ale, it's Dan and Doug with whiskey and cigars. And I started buying more cigars to hand out to people and just telling stories and having a great time. And then I realized I was spending a lot of money on these pretty nice cigars that people would take one puff on and go, "Ew, I hate cigars," and then they'd throw it into the bushes or something. So that part of the ale changed over the years as well, but it was a fun time and good stories, good times.
So it doesn't happen anymore?
Oh, it might. I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, you are not.
But not with me and Dan.
Oh.
Dan lives in New York and is not an active member of a Morris side.
Oh.
And I haven't been an active member for the last several years, so I don't know if it's continued or not. It may have.
Do you miss going to the ale?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Why'd you stop going?
I wasn't on a Morris dance team.
Oh.
I did go once or maybe
team that's invited.
I think I went once or twice as a guest because
Oh.
I know lots of people that attend, and I had no trouble in imposing as a guest. But it's a little different, being a guest at the event rather than taking part.
Yeah.
And also, after having attended for many, many years, it was kind of nice to have the freedom to do something else on that long weekend.
Memorial Day.
Right.
You want to say anything about Aunt Sally?
Oh, that was just fun. It was another activity that Rhett Krause brought to the ale. It wasn't. It was fun to do. Yeah, it was fun to do.
Yeah. Do you have any questions, Susan?
I have a comment. As a totally unbiased,
Oh,
not
of course, unbiased.
spectator. You were a pretty darn good Aunt Sally player.
I had my moments.
Every Saturday morning for, I don't know when it started. We'll have to get Rhett to talk to us about when the Aunt Sally World Championship that Rhett hosted, when that began. But it would always be the Canadian team, the Toronto Morris Men, against the Marlboro Men and any and all comers. And as a Marlboro Morris Man and former Toronto Morris Man, you were up there participating in Aunt Sally, and you were no slouch with Aunt Sally.
I think I won one year. I was the high scorer one year.
Do you have like a crown or a trophy or something?
I had the trophy for a year, and then I had to. Well, it was a pewter mug, a pretty fancy pewter mug.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Anything you want to say that you didn't say? Anything you were thinking, oh, gosh, I'm going to talk about that, and I didn't ask that question?
I guess not really. It's been a very important event, probably the most important event in my life in terms of something that's happened consistently since I was on my own. And so many friends, so many big moments in my life, up and down. But it's been important to me.
I would say too that over the years there's been a lot of consistency in which teams were invited, and there was kind of a core group that were frequent ale attendees, So this also kind of served as a place where that community came together once a year, and I think just reforged the bonds that held that community together. So it felt like an important gathering time. Makes me think about what Tony said about time and place. That it was always that time and that place for the community to come together and do that. I'm wondering if you think back, if I asked you to pick out a favorite highlight or couple of, no?
I'd really have to think about that.
Stand out.
I'm sorry to say that right at this moment, the things that really stand out were not, strangely, were not pleasant things. And maybe it's because I was really involved in this event, that it was bound to happen, that there were some unhappy memories as well as happy ones. And I want to come away with this thinking that this has been a great thing in my life. But right now, when you ask about what's the one thing that's really jumping out in your mind, it's not something I want to talk about.
Okay. And that's probably, you're not alone in that.
Probably not.
You know, for people that have attended this many years at this event, there's been a lot of experiences that have happened, both good and bad, and that's all part of the story of the ale.
Yeah.
So, okay.
It is a place of intense highs and intense lows.
Yeah. Yeah.
And always will be. You know, when you bring that many people together who are there really representing sort of a singular passion in their life, they come with so much energy, you know, and so many expectations. And there's bound to be ups and lows, you know, highs and lows.
You know, for something I didn't say, part of my job as music meister was I was at the front of processionals. And every single time you come down that hill at the college with 200 Morris dancers behind you, that's a very moving experience that happened over and over and over. There isn't one year where it was better than others. It was just always fabulous. So, you know, there's lots and lots of great memories.
Yeah.
I just can't single out one.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Not surprising. And there are, you know, as I said before, so many photos of the ale and you, Doug Creighton, at the front.
Yeah.
The front of the procession.
Yippee.
That's a great memory. Okay, thank you so much.